Leazenby, having been duly sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth relating to said matter, was examined and testified as follows. Direct examination questions by Mr. Rozzi. Okay, we're on the record. State of Indiana versus Richard Allen, cause 08C012210 MR. Present are myself, former Sheriff Tobe Leazenby. If I get your name wrong or if I pronounce it wrong, please. You're spot on. Okay, thank you. And Prosecutor Macleod. Might be Defense Counsel Baldwin. And then we've got a couple of staff members of ours in the room as well. All right. I keep wanting to call you Sheriff. I don't know if that's really appropriate or not. As I've told people, Sheriff is similar to the judges. Once a sheriff, always a sheriff. I may do that. Don't mean to. Sheriff Liggett. No. Have you ever taken a deposition before? Yes, sir. Okay. All right. First of all, would you state your name? Tobe Leazenby. And Mr. Leazenby, let me just say a few things real quick. I know you've done this before, but the most important thing is try to answer audibly. Yes, no, instead of ahas and uh-uhs. Okay? Yes. And second, if you need to stop for anything, just let us know and we'll stop. Okay? Yes. Use the restroom. I think there's actually some water down under the table if you need that as well. All right? Thank you. Okay. First of all, tell me, in what position are you currently employed? Appointed Chief Deputy Sheriff for Sheriff Liggett. And generally speaking, how would you describe your current duties in the law enforcement industry, so to speak? It's a combination of administrative and responding to calls for service for the agency. And back in 2017, specifically in February of 2017, were you the acting sheriff in Carroll County? The elected sheriff, yes. And how long did you maintain that position? My first term began in 2015, and my final year was 2022, after re-election 2018. How long in total have you been in the law enforcement business, so to speak? I've served Carroll County continuously since 1986. All right, and did you do anything in preparation for the deposition today? Review documents, speak with other individuals, look at photographs, anything like that? Only spoke with Sheriff Liggett. And when did that conversation take place? After his deposition yesterday. And what was the nature of that conversation? Just a general inquiry on my part as to what may have come up during his deposition. Okay, and what was his general reaction? Very, I don't want to say laid back, but I mean he felt relaxed during his deposition. Did he talk about any subject matter in particular? No. Did he mention anything that seemed more important or less important than anything else? The only thing I guess that he did mention to me that there was inquiry concerning my involvement with this investigation while I was sheriff, and we shared that conversation. During the course of your law enforcement career, have you ever been disciplined for any kind of misconduct? No. And did you? I asked you this a minute ago, but I want to make sure I understand. Did you review any documents in the last couple of weeks in preparation for the depot today? No. I had offered up just some bullet point topics to Mr. Macleod. Are you generally familiar with those topics? I have reviewed those, yes. Okay, so after you reviewed those, did you go back and look at any police reports to refresh your memory about anything? No. Based on looking at that kind of rough outline? No. Okay. Let's talk about this particular circumstance that occurred back in February 2017 out here at the trail. Okay? Yes, sir. Just tell me, if you would, do you believe that there were any eyewitnesses to the suspect or persons of interest in this case? I believe, yes, there were witnesses to the suspect. Okay? And can you tell me who those witnesses were? I do not know specific names or individual names. Okay? You can't think of any of them as you sit here today? No. Did you ever interview any of these eyewitnesses of whose names you don't recall? No. Have you ever communicated, interviewed, talked to Rick Allen in the course of this investigation? No. Let me ask you this. Going back to 2017, February of 2017, tell me, in the weeks and months after this incident occurred, what was your role in the investigation? I really had no role other than, and this was throughout. As a police administrator, I had asked our detectives at the time, Detective Kevin Hammond and Detective Tony Liggett, to communicate with me as often as they could on any updated information related to the investigation. But as far as actual hands-on involvement with the investigation, I played no role. Okay, is that statement accurate throughout the entire investigation? Yes. The only thing I would add to that is, again, as a police administrator, I would participate in the unified command meetings that would occur throughout the investigation, but mainly from the aspect from an administrative standpoint to, if you will, to remain in the loop. So when you talk about unified command, who are you talking about? Indiana State Police, FBI, and our agency, and then potentially any other outside agencies that had come alongside of us. Did you participate in, I'm going to say most or all of those formal meetings, if you will? To my recollection, yes. Would it be fair to refer to those as briefings? Is that kind of a good way to refer to them? Yes, sir. All right. And so when one of those briefings would take place, tell me in your own words what you were doing. Were you sitting in the room? Were you making decisions? Yeah. Mainly in the capacity of listening to the information being shared. And a lot of the speakers, if you will, during those meetings were the hands-on investigators involved with the case. And so listening, and then if there was a decision to be made, again, a lot of discussion in moving forward and how to proceed in moving forward, and then a consensus amongst the group on moving forward with whatever the subject matter was at that moment. In your opinion, was there any one law enforcement official or other party that was, let's say, in charge of this investigation? I personally, as sheriff, felt that we, being a county crime, if you will, alleged crime, that I considered our agency as the lead agency. But again, as time went along, it was quite clear that multiple agencies, multiple voices within those various agencies played a role. Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that there wasn't one officer that was kind of the chief, for lack of a better word. That would be correct, sir. And I think me understanding your role is going to help maybe kind of condense and make this a little bit more efficient today. But I still need to go through, sure, some of these talking points, okay? So forgive me if you're thinking that I'm being overbearing, but it's better to cover this now than to come back later. I understand. So in terms of, let's talk about, well, let me ask you this. Have you ever interviewed a witness involved in this investigation on your own? The only thing I vaguely recall is maybe the first day or two when the case initiated, that I sat down with local community members that had their suspicions, if you will, of particular other suspects. And so, that's the only investigative role I ever played or recall playing was very early on with the investigation. But as far as other witnesses and individuals as the case progressed, no, I did not. When you say you were sitting down with these people, are you making home visits, they coming to you? No, they actually, at that time obviously our meeting place, if you will, or investigation began at the city building here in Delphi, and so I specifically remember meeting with local individuals in, I believe it was in the chief of police's office at that time. Can you give me an estimate as to how many people, local people that you might have talked to, maybe a range, that were giving you information regarding potential suspects? Well, again, as sheriff, whether it was in person or by phone calls, obviously most communities this would occur, I received just tips and information from individuals. And so to put a number on it is difficult to do. But throughout the whole time of the investigation, I don't know if it's an exaggeration or not, but thousands maybe. Oh, okay. Yeah. And when you did this, would you have documented this stuff kind of in the normal course of your larger investigative process? I think it was on Orion was the system that was used. Right. Not consistently, but yes, there were pieces of information I would enter into Orion. Okay, so you chose on some occasions to memorialize that information. On other occasions, you just didn't. Correct. Was there some, not to be too technical here, but was there threshold that determined that? Why did you do that? Actually, I recall on some of those where I personally felt there may be an issue with a particular piece of information. I consulted with our detectives and ran that information by them, and then we would have, as I remember, a general census that, yeah, this is far-fetched, that kind of a mental state. Other pieces of information we felt. If we felt that based on the information I received that we might be able to progress with the investigation, then we would document that. So it is an accurate statement to say that you acted kind of as your own kind of screening device. You talked to others when you thought it was necessary, but there might have been times when you didn't think that was necessary? Yes, that would be true. It sounds like to me that you were kind of acting like more of a catcher's mitt here than you were going out and, and seeking leads and working witnesses. Is that kind of an accurate statement? Very true, yes. Okay, so over the course of this investigation, did you ever go outside of the Carroll County community or the county? I'm going to say generally speaking, and talk to witnesses involved in this case? No. Did you ever sit down with anyone who had information regarding the case that was from outside the Carroll County community? Again, as far as or communicate with them in any respect? Right. Not necessarily face-to-face. Yeah. Again, referring back to what I said earlier, I received a number of phone calls, whether it was in the United States. Actually, I think I fielded a couple of phone calls from the United Kingdom. People purporting to be from other places near and far? Right. All right. Were there any phone calls that were made to you or information that was shared to you from areas outside of the kind of Carroll County community that stand out or that were helpful in this investigation? The only thing I recall were there were a couple of individuals from Franklin that were adamant involving a former friend of theirs as being the individual involved. And when I say adamant, I would receive phone calls from them. Goodness. Probably at least one time a month and that information was followed up on by our investigators and didn't lead to anything. This would have been information that you would have essentially inputted into Orion at some point. Yes. Can you just tell me the names? It might help me. The only thing I can remember is first names. The individual they were, if you will, pointing the finger at was an individual by the first name of Danny. Goodness. Drawing a blank on the two individuals that were consistent. On the informants? Yes, that's who you're drawing a blank on? Right. But the suspect, so to speak, was Danny? Danny. I'm looking at my list here. Daniel Nation, does that have anything? No. Okay, all right. I don't see any other Dannys on this list. You don't know who the last name of that individual is? No. Okay, all right. Was there anyone else that you recall? We're in the world of, everybody else is investigating your crime, in addition to your own officers and staff. Was there anyone else that reached out to you from anywhere around the world that you're like, this is information that's important and we need to follow up on it? No. Nothing. No, none of these UK people had anything real. No. Okay, all right, let's get back and talk about some more kind of pertinent issues in terms of what went on out at the trail in February of 2017. Okay? Let's talk about this timeline. You're aware that law enforcement has kind of pieced together a timeline of events? Yes. Were you a part of any of that? Did you play a role in piecing that together? I vividly recall when the information initially came into us, at least of the girls' disappearances. I was actually in a county council that evening of the 13th, yeah, and it was brought to my attention and that we were going to initiate first responders were going to initiate a search of the last known area where the girls were seen. So again, it was a lot of coordinating with other area first response agencies and coordinating our efforts in that search on the 13th. Okay? So you were involved in some of that? Yes, let's talk about the timeline on the 14th. And what I'm talking about is the timeline from, sometime around, let's say noon on the 14th till 4 to 6 p.m. general time frame. You with me? Yes. Were you a part of kind of piecing that timeline together as things moved forward? Was your work product involved in that process? No. Again, it was a lot of communication involving our local deputies and our detectives as they progressed with the investigation, and kind of receiving updates. Not that I sat in my office the whole time, but I also played an active role with the public information officer aspect for the agency, and so I worked alongside Sergeant Kim Riley with Indiana State Police during that time period, and coordinating a lot of the media events that were quickly evolving. So what I'm hearing is that you really didn't play a substantive or material role in developing this timeline that has been offered up in legal documents. That's correct, sir. No. I did not. So you don't, by extension, I assume, don't have an opinion on the accuracy of it, 'cause you don't have any stake in it really. You don't have any work product in it. That's correct. I think you answered this question earlier. Who do you think was primarily responsible for creating that timeline? Again, as it was quickly evolving, the unified command involving Indiana State Police, FBI, and our agency, it was a group effort? A group effort. Okay, this question came up yesterday and it may be slightly out of context, but do you have any opinion at all as to the timing of the death of either one or both of these girls? No. In terms of, let's talk about suspects, people involved just in a general sense. Okay? How many? Based on your knowledge of this case, how many individuals do you think were involved in this crime? Based on my knowledge of this crime, I feel that at least 2. And I'm assuming, without being a rocket scientist here, that you think one of those is Rick Allen? Yes. Okay. And what is it that leads you to believe there's more than one? That's based on what's been described to me on the alleged actions that had occurred involving the terrain and the location of where that alleged crime or crimes had occurred. And so I feel that it would be difficult for one individual to accomplish what occurred. Okay, today, the purpose of today truly is to kind of screen a lot of these issues without getting into more detail. So I'm gonna maybe not get into, well, tell me all the facts that lead you to believe that. But frankly, we may cover that on another day. Is that fair? That's fair. Okay. Is there an active investigation focused on suspects other than Rick Allen as we sit here today? Based on the information that has been shared with me, the investigation is still active and we continue to look into potentially other individuals. Okay. Can you tell me if there are any other individuals, to your knowledge, that are persons of interest right now? I have no knowledge of that. Who would be in the best position to answer that question based on your knowledge of the team that's working on this case? I would suggest, either Sheriff Liggett or Detective Sergeant Jerry Holman with the Indiana State Police. All right, let's talk about this search that you were kind of mentioning earlier. You said you kind of participated in some of the organization of the search, right? On the 13th? Yes. Describe to me if you could. I'm looking just for some scope here. Who was involved in that? I recall Delphi Fire Department, actually a great majority of members of all of our fire departments throughout the county. EMS personnel, a huge number of members of the community. Can you estimate? 10, 50, 100, 200? Goodness. As I recall the crowd, I would guess close to maybe 200 or more. Not including the emergency personnel? Right. Okay. And is this all, are these people all or most or all involved with this search on the 13th? Yes. So the response was pretty quick? Yes. From the community? Yes. All right. And then is that same statement basically true for a portion of the day on the 14th? Yes. So basically you're redeployed? Yes. And got right back at it? Yes. Okay. Understanding that formalities may not have been the entire focus, who was kind of in control of that effort to try and organize it? As I recall, the fire chief at the time, Daryl Starrett, played a role because fire agencies had, in the past, have obviously played assist roles in searches of whether it's younger children or elderly or anybody that's missing throughout the county. So Chief Starrett actually had experience, if you will, in organizing these types of searches. Is he still around? Yes. We're only asking that question a little bit because of the time delay. Yeah, he's still with the fire department. And what, to your knowledge, what specialized equipment was used? I mean, we've heard of, I think, a drone somebody mentioned. Not a big surprise. But what do you recall? Drones. Obviously, with water involved, there were boats on the water. I think maybe even at one point the Indiana State Police had their helicopter in the air over that particular area. I don't know if there was any kind of, the Department of Natural Resources, local or conservation officers maybe had equipment involved as well. But yeah, that's it. Were the boats and drones and helicopters used on both the 13th and the 14th? Yes. Were you operating any of these? I know you weren't flying a helicopter, but were you in any of these boats or were you, no, a part of any of that process? No. I hadn't thought about the boats so much as I had the drones and helicopters. Were there? Who was using the watercraft? Again, as I recall, mainly the conservation officers. I can't remember, we obviously have a boat, but I don't think we implemented ours. We just mainly relied again on DNR. Okay, was the boat on the creek down there? Yes. And were they traversing that? Yes. Creek line? Do you have any idea of kind of the distances they were traveling? I don't. Or maybe the endpoints? No. Okay. Who would have been? Would that have been Doolin, Officer Doolin? I can't remember if Lieutenant was supervisor back then. I'm trying to remember who supervised before him, but it was either Dan or whoever his predecessor was. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right. Can you tell me about what time this search, if you will, was kind of called off on the 13th? Vaguely, I recollect maybe 11 p.m., midnight. I don't know how this happens formally. I'm guessing nobody just blows a whistle and everybody goes home. Right, but I'm assuming mostly through radio traffic. Yes, who would have done that? Who would have made that decision? That was kind of, again, I won't say unified command, but a unified group decision. And that conversation would involve, again, fire, EMS, myself. One thing I do want to add is, because I caught some grief over this early on, was that they wanted to know why we had stopped the search. When I said we had stopped the search to regroup for the following morning, that was mainly for emergency responders, because it was felt that our group coming out the next morning, they needed to get some rest and come back out the next morning. But we did not stop community members who wanted to, in essence, go out on their own. And so I don't know specific names, but there were members of the community that remained out all night. So did you actually talk to some of these people eventually? Yes. Do you have any sense of what the volume of that was? The number of individuals? Yeah, 2 or 3 motivated humans, or are we talking maybe a couple of dozen? I would estimate, as I recall, maybe 10 to 12. Was the family, if you know, involved in that process or that circumstance? I believe there were. I don't know who specifically, but family members were involved. I mean, I got to imagine if one of those were my kid, probably wouldn't be getting any rest. Right. So that's your recollection. That's very possible? Yes. All right. So let's move on here and talk about, give me 1 second here. Do you know what time it was the next day that you kind of commenced this search, if you could estimate? I want to say 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m. that next morning. Was that basically daylight? Being February, it was still dark. So that was when we began is more or less to meet again at the fire department to kind of go over that plan, if you will, and what we're going to do moving forward. Was there anything that you recall that was different between the way you searched on the 13th and the way you searched on the 14th? Anything that stands out if you handled this differently or that occurred differently? I do not recall anything different. All right, we're gonna move on here and talk about some other things, okay? Let's talk about voice data. Obviously, we're all familiar with there was a recording, and we've all heard the down the hill reference 4,000 times. Was there, to your knowledge, an attempt to analyze the actual acoustics associated with that recording? I do not recall any specifics related to that. I would assume that would be kind of FBI stuff, for lack of a better way of thinking about it. It's almost LD-esque, sure. But you don't recall you being involved in anything in that regard? That would be correct. Let's talk about the photo or video of what people have referred to as the bridge guy. Is that a reference that you're familiar with? Yes, sir. Are you familiar with any analysis that was done with regard to the dimensions of the individual on that video? Height, weight, maybe even distances associated with the location of the individual in the video? Those kinds of things? The only thing I recall were discussions as it related to our unified command meetings. But as far as any detailed analysis above and beyond, is that the entirety of it? To the best of my knowledge, yes. Let's talk about DNA, okay? Yeah. Who handled the processing and analysis of the DNA evidence in this case? The Indiana State Police initially, their crime scene investigators in their Indianapolis lab. Did any other agencies that you're aware of process any DNA-related evidence in this case? Not that I am aware of. Are you aware of any samples that were extracted from the crime scene in this case that generated a DNA profile? I don't recall any of that, no. Okay? Are you aware of any DNA-related evidence in this case, whether it came from the crime scene or anywhere else that links Richard Allen to that crime scene? No. Are you aware of any DNA evidence in this case, whether from the crime scene or somewhere else, that links any other suspects or persons of interest to the crime scene? No. Are you aware of any ongoing analysis, lab analysis, testing of any kind with regard to DNA evidence? No. I know that there were a number of items taken from Mr. Allen's home when they searched the home. I'm sure you're aware of that. Clothing and firearms and knives and things like that. Yes, I'm going to ask the same question. Are you aware of any analysis that's ongoing with regard to any of those items? I am not aware. However, I would say in the course of business, as it relates to an investigation such as this, that the answer would be yes, that more than likely yes, there is, that they're still doing some testing. Right. And do you believe that just because you're thinking it just takes time to go through all that, or because you've been told that? Mainly based on my experience and the time period that it takes to cover such a large amount. Are you aware of any DNA profiles or evidence that was extracted from the scene that is known not to be connected with the two girls? Yes. Tell me what you're aware of. I know that there was DNA recovered, but as it was explained to me, there is not enough of it exists to develop a profile. Do you have any idea where that came from? I mean, as far as what part of the crime scene? Yeah. I mean, was it on a log? Was it on a cigarette butt? I believe, was it on one of the girls? As I remember, I want to say from one of the logs or pieces of wood at the crime scene. Do you know from what type of substance that partial profile or DNA material was extracted? Saliva, blood, skin tissue, hair? Again, as I recall it being described to me, I believe it may have been actual like perspiration or bodily fluid, sweat. Sweat DNA? Yeah. Do you think that, to the best of your knowledge, was that information recovered during the processing of the crime scene? During the formal processing? Yes. In other words, somebody didn't go out there a week later or 2 weeks later. Right. And start rounding up stuff from a log? No. During that core time at the very beginning. Okay. Let's talk about tool mark evidence. Okay? Okay. All right, so I'm assuming you're aware of this unspent cartridge that was recovered from the scene? Yes, sir. What is the significance of that cartridge in your mind to this investigation? The link that it has to a firearm that Mr. Allen allegedly owns, okay? And again, I'm not going to get into all the dirty details. We'll leave that for another day. But describe to me what you mean by the link, just to make sure I think we're talking about the same thing. The extraction marks as they relate to the ammunition that was recovered compared to the firearm that was recovered during the search of Mr. Allen's residence, particularly those extraction marks. I know there is opinion throughout, but what I know of my 37-year career, it's been ingrained in me that extraction marks on a firearm are, if you will, a fingerprint for a firearm. Okay, what do you mean by there's opinions throughout? Arguments on both sides as far as whether or not extraction marks are legitimate or not. You're aware that in the industry, so to speak, that issue is heavily debated? Right. The reliability of that? Yes. There's kind of a division of the ranks, so to speak. Yes. What is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of imagining how this all went down. Melissa Oberg generates a lab result and says, hey, I think that this firearm and this cartridge were linked, right? That's basically what we're talking about here, right? Right. Yes. If I'm not right, just stop me and correct me. I don't know the name of the particular lab individual, but okay, I'm assuming there was a meeting pretty quickly after that to discuss the findings of the laboratory. Yes. Were you in that meeting? I do not recall being a part of that meeting. No. Do you think you would recall if you were a part of that meeting? Oh, yes. Talking about something that significant? Yes. Okay. Do you have any, I'll call it, second-hand knowledge about what occurred in that meeting? Because you've talked to Sheriff Liggett or Trooper Holman or anybody like that? If anything, there would have been after, not long after that meeting, Detective Liggett at the time would have come, or did come, as I recall, to my office to share that information one-on-one with me. Are you aware of any concerns that were raised by any law enforcement officials regarding the veracity of those laboratory findings? No, I'm not aware of anything. I'm going to ask that just a different way just to make sure that you understand what I'm asking. Did Sheriff Liggett or any of the other officers come to you and say, I got some real concerns about this because of A, B, or C? No. I don't ever remember that conversation. Are you aware of any ongoing tool mark testing in this case? I am not aware. Are you aware of any other firearms that were analyzed? This might be a little tougher for you to answer, but any other firearms that were analyzed other than this particular firearm that we just talked about? I am not aware. Let's talk about cell phone information, okay? Do you know if there has been a data dump? You know what that means? Yes, from Richard Allen's cell phone that was completed or conducted by law enforcement officials? I am not specifically aware of any of that, no. Are you aware of any information that may have been extracted from any cell phones owned by Richard Allen that would have connected him to these two girls? Again, those actions did occur, but again, that was based on, my recollection is based on conversation that Detective Liggett had with me at the time in his efforts to keep me updated on various points of the investigation. What do you just generally remember about that? Just that. It was just a basic conversation, I guess is the way I'll word it, that we have Mr. Allen's cell phone, and we're going through it. But as far as specifics related to what they recovered, I don't recall any specific details. You're not aware of any face-to-face conversations that Keegan Kline had with either of these two girls? Right, no conversation. Or that there was some kind of meeting between them at any point or anything like that? Right. It's all basically related to this shots account? Yes. Okay, same questions with Ron Logan. Any connection between the two girls from a cell phone or forensic standpoint of Ron Logan? No information. No connection there that was ever brought to my attention. Any connection between Ron Logan himself and either one of these girls' families that you're aware of? Yeah, nothing comes to mind. And I don't know if I asked this question earlier, but any connection at all between either of the two girls' families and the Allen family? No connections I'm aware of. This is maybe similar, a similar line of questioning, and I'm a little bit less versed in this, but I'm gonna take a shot. Have you ever heard of geofencing? Yes. Do you know what that means? It was actually a new term to me when this investigation began. So, do you believe that there was some attempts to geofence the crime scene and the area surrounding the crime scene around the time period of middle February 2017? Yes. And again, that was based on what I recall of unified command conversations that involved FBI and I believe the U.S. Marshal Service. Okay, so you didn't have a whole lot to do with that yourself? Absolutely not. Would you have just been a recipient or catcher again of the information if it was generated? Yes, and helpful? Yes. Just tell me maybe in summary, what, if anything, are you aware of that is material to this investigation with regard to that information? I know that there were various cell phone numbers that were collected and further followed up on by the investigators that were garnered through that geofencing process, so it allowed the investigators to further look into individuals. My sense is they were able to extract a bunch of this forensic data and they kind of unencrypted it or decoded it, if you will. And then they started following up with these phone numbers and contacting people, right? Right. Kind of working backwards in a way? Right. Any information in the investigation that you're aware of that would have connected Rick Allen with any of that geofencing data? Nothing that was ever brought to my attention. Are you aware of any, I'm gonna call it, digital forensic data? Same kind of stuff we're talking about? That corroborated that Rick Allen was actually at the trail that day? I don't recall any of that information, any connection. Let's talk about social media activity. Okay, I gather, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this investigation contained one of the most exhaustive social media analysis and investigations probably in your history as a law enforcement officer, right? Yes. Would you say that there were large, significant amounts of resources that were utilized to try and use social media to your advantage as a law enforcement? Yes. Community. Yes. Are you aware of any information? Excuse me. I digress. You're fine. Are you aware of any social media connections between Richard Allen and either one of these two girls? No. Do you think you would be aware of that if it existed at this point in the investigation? Yes. Are you aware of any social media information that connects Richard Allen to this particular scene or this area near the bridge and that general area back in February of 2017? I guess the way I would respond to that, obviously, is not that particular date or those two dates of February 13th or 14th of 17, but obviously since then, yes. Okay, what are you talking about since then? As far as his, I do recall at one point the investigators brought to my attention he had been interviewed and had been in that area in that time period. I'm talking about social media information, things that were pulled from Facebook, Instagram, all these different, mediums. To answer your question, no, I'm not aware of anything. Are you aware of any social media information that connected anyone else to that particular area? I'm going to call it the crime scene area on February 13th or 14th of 2017. I don't know if this is what specifically is being brought up at this point, but we did have, and I'm drawing a blank on the specific terminology involved, but we had individuals that would post, and I remember seeing particularly photographs of their speculation of seeing other individuals. The specific example I remember is a post of allegedly there was an individual under the bridge that they speculated may have played a role that day, and actually following or watching the girls on the bridge. Let me ask you this question. Is there another officer that's involved in this investigation who would be more equipped to talk about the details involving this circumstance than you? Yes, and who would that be? I would say probably potentially Mr. McClellan's investigator, Mr. Mullen. Any other information that you're aware of on social media or extracted from social media during the course of this investigation that tied anybody else with this particular scene or circumstance? Not that I remember. I think I asked this earlier. Anything that connects Richard Allen to the scene regarding social media communications or photos or images of any kind? Nothing that I'm aware of. There were computers that were collected in this case, I certainly know from my client's house. Were there other computers that you're aware of that were collected from other people's homes? I am not aware of specifics, but I would assume that yes, there were, but I don't have that knowledge. Are you aware of any information that was generated from, I'll call them data dumps, from computers or analysis of hard drives that would have connected Richard Allen with this particular crime? I am not aware. Are you aware of any, same question with regard to the computer information, digital information, that would have connected any other suspects to this crime? I am not aware. Is there any other forensic evidence, fingerprints, shoe prints, anything like that that connects Richard Allen with this particular circumstance? I am not aware of any of that information. I guess the fingerprints would be probably the most traditional. Right. Were there any fingerprints that were extracted from the scene that played any significance or role in this investigation that you're aware of? No, not that I'm aware of. Was there any conclusion as to why there were no fingerprints extracted from this particular scene? In other words, maybe an officer said, well, clearly somebody was wearing gloves, or they were washed away, the scene was tampered with. Anything like that? No. The only thing to add to that list of whether it's gloves or anything else, I remember a conversation also being brought up at some point early on that obviously this was an outdoor setting, so that weather could have potentially played a role with the recovery of such items. What do you remember about the weather on the 13th and 14th? It was unusually warm for that time of year, mid-February. I think we've all heard through the stories, if you will, related to this, that the girls were out of school and, it was warm. So they were going for a walk on a nice warm February day. Were you out there on the 13th and 14th yourself? No, I take that back. I was actually at the scene, if you will, the following day just for a brief time period, just to observe and this was actually, if I remember correctly, it was well after the crime scene investigators had already finished their responsibilities. So you're talking about on the 14th later in the day? Yes. Do you remember? Again, I wasn't there, thankfully. But just tell me what your recollection is about. Was there moisture in the air? Was the ground wet out there? Was it pretty dry for that time of year? Kind of just describe for me what you experienced. That particular area, I do remember. I remember the 13th for some reason. It was partly cloudy or partly sunny, however you say it. The 14th, the next day it was sunny. But at one point, for some reason, I remember when I was actually at the scene, it was cloudy during that part of the day. And as far as the ground in there, obviously that is adjacent to the creek there. So, I mean, there was some moisture closer to the bank. But on the ground further up, for the most part, it was dry. Because for some reason, I don't know why I remember this, but I remember the leaves crunching under my feet. So back to the fingerprints, the idea was, well, this is not an ideal area to extract prints in the first place because of the natural setting. Is that what you were suggesting? Yes, but there was conversation about that? Yes. But you're not aware of any fingerprints that were extracted in this case that really helped in any way with the investigation? Yes, correct. Same question about shoe prints. I vaguely remember a conversation with the investigators for that being checked. But as far as any findings, I don't recall specifics. Do you have any recollection of there being like an actual analysis? I don't know how you do a shoe print analysis, frankly. I've not run into that. But do you remember that being an actual, those being conducted, I guess? I guess I will add, I do remember there being shoe prints. Yeah, shoe prints being found on the, I'm going to refer to it as the south side of the creek. And I don't know whether or not, obviously, at least back in the day, a cast, if you will, would be taken of those particular prints. But again, I don't know whether or not that occurred or not. But I do know there were shoe prints located, because if I remember correctly, a photo was shared with me as it relates to those shoe prints. South side of the creek being the opposite side from where the girls were found, right? Correct. My directions out there are a little tough. I saw some photos at some point of some shoe prints. I felt like they were maybe along the bank of a creek. Right. Or kind of in a sandy area. I remember them being muddy, or maybe it was gravelly or something. Right. As far as you know, there was no information gathered from that circumstance that was helpful? As far as I know, yes. Let's talk about surveillance video. There's thousands upon thousands of hours of surveillance video that was gathered in this case. Was there any surveillance video from the area around the trail that was collected that was helpful to the investigation? Nothing comes to mind. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the Hoosier Harvest Store video. Yes, you're familiar with that, right? Yes, we can debate about whether or not that's around the trail or not. Close in time, right? Other than that video, which we all, I think, have a pretty good handle on, is there any other video that you're aware of from any homes out there, from any businesses, anything like that that was pertinent to this investigation? Not that I recall. Same question regarding trail cams. I guess not pertinent to this investigation. But I believe there was an individual that had his picture was seen on a trail cam that Mr. Logan had posted on his property there. But to the best of my knowledge, as I remember, that individual was followed into, and it was determined that that photograph was actually from, if I remember, the previous fall during deer hunting season. So just to try and summarize, you think there was a trail cam and there was a photo that was offered up in some form, and that the police looked into that and it was determined that it wasn't really related? Right. Do you remember who the individual was? I don't. But you think it had to do with the Ron Logan property? Yes. Are you aware of any video, surveillance video, or photographs, I'm going to ask that kind of in the same context, that demonstrate or reflect Rick Allen's activities on the 13th or 14th, other than the Hoosier Harvest Store video? No. In other words, was there a gas station downtown where you extracted a video and he was in getting coffee or anything like that? No. You think you would be aware of that at this point in the investigation? Yes. Based on, well, is there any information other than the Hoosier Harvest Store video that we've heard about that you believe definitively places Rick Allen at any other location on the 13th or 14th? Based on information I'm aware of, no. No other location comes to mind. And are you aware of any video, including the Hoosier Harvest store video, that specifically generated an image of Rick Allen? No. So you're not aware of any image generated by the Hoosier Harvest store video Rick Allen was in? Right, no. There was some discussion yesterday about, I'm going to loosely refer to it as the muddy, bloody person. Do you know who I'm talking about? Yes. You know who I'm referring to, right? Yes. This would be, I believe, the person that Sarah Carbaugh described. Does that sound accurate? I don't recall her name, but I know what you're referencing. Are you aware of any video or photographs that exist that captured that individual? No. In this investigation? No. Do you have, as you sit here today, do you have any sense of where Sarah Carbaugh said she saw that person and kind of how that all transpired? As I recall when I had conversation with our investigators, that she had observed this individual walking in essence westbound on our County Road 300 North, near the Morning Heights Cemetery area there, and then walking along or on to the Mears property on the north side of the road, and the last sight that she may have had of him, of that individual, was going behind a barn on the Mears property. So you recall that she told law enforcement authorities that she saw that individual walking behind a barn on the Mears property? Yes. Do you know who it was that you talked to that communicated that to you? Again, that may have been a part of the unified command conversation or briefing at one point, and that being shared. I'm not going to get maps out today again, because we're not really here to do that, but I'm trying just to get some context. First of all, how many Mears farms are there out there? Strikes me there's at least 2, if not more. Yeah, I know of at least 3 in that general area. So when we're talking about Mears farms, I guess in my mind, I'm talking about a homestead, which includes a house and at least some outbuildings, barns, whatever. Yes, it's a red brick, I want to say Victorian-style type home. And this would be on the north side of the road? Yes, and would this be west of the cemetery? Yes, and is that the home that you believe this barn was associated with that you mentioned earlier? Yes, so what you recall is that there was discussion about this muddy, bloody person walking behind that barn, which would then be kind of to the north of the house? Yes. Do you remember any more details about that? No. Let's talk about, I've got my little note here, hate crimes. That's the way I characterized it. Did any part of your investigation focus on the possibility that these crimes were carried out by some type of, say, hate group? At one point, I remember the investigators looking at, and when I say investigators, more so I think the FBI and U.S. Marshals, possibly even the Indiana State Police, looking at a quasi-religious group. I can't remember the name of that group off the top of my head, but whether or not this, obviously not satanic, but something along the line of discussions related to their rituals, whenever they participate in their events. Forgive me, when I think of hate groups, I think of things like the KKK. That's okay. I also think of things like Hell's Angels and gangs. I'm thinking in a broad sense. Sure. I'm not trying to, so, do you remember any specific group? The name of any group that may have been a group of interest? I guess as a way of, again, I can't recall the specific name. In fact, it was the first time I had heard of them in my career, so I can't recall the specific group's name, but I do know that they were followed into. Okay? Do you remember anything? There was a little bit of discussion about this yesterday. Do you remember anything about that group in any detail, in terms of like ritualistic stuff? For some reason, what came to mind was the questioning of some tree limbs or sticks, the way they were found at the scene, and the way they were aligned or piled up. And that? I can't remember the specifics, but that there may be a connection between the way those tree limbs or sticks were configured and being comparable to this group's participation in various outdoor whatever they participate in. Okay, somebody, I think it was Sheriff Liggett yesterday, mentioned a rune. Does that word even ring a bell? What was it again? A rune. A rune, no. Well, let me ask you this. Did you participate in any of this part of the investigation? No. Looking at any of these hate groups, if you will, or extremist groups is probably a better word. No. Again, as I recall, the combination of investigators were the state police FBI, and I think maybe some US Marshals actually may have been involved as well. Did any? You mentioned earlier, you talked to a lot of people in this community all the way from here to the UK, I think is pretty much what you said. Did you ever have anybody come to you and say, hey, look, there's an extremist group and these people might be behind this, and you need to follow these leads? I guess for lack of a better. Right. Nothing specific that I remember, but again, like many of us, I received a number of various ideas and thoughts. Do you know if there's still any active investigation pertaining to this type of extremist activity being involved with this case? Not that I'm aware of. Let's see here. Let's talk about the crime scene. And just so we have some context again, my understanding is that you just tell me in your own words, when did you first visit the crime scene? As I remember, it would have been February 14th, again later that afternoon, pretty much after everything was wrapped up by the crime scene investigators. When you got there, I guess I'll just get right to the point. Were the two bodies there? Yes. So they were still laying in there, what I'm going to call their natural state? Right, yes. So do you think you saw an intact crime scene in your mind? Based on, I guess, my past experience in that, as it relates to outdoor-type crime scenes, I would say yes. Has there been any evidence? This is a broad question, but I think fair. Has there been any evidence from that crime scene? And I'm talking about generally the area surrounding where the girls were found, and an extension of that, maybe to the bridge, that connects Rick Allen with this crime? Not that I'm aware of. Do you believe that sex played any role in this particular crime? Based on the information that was shared with me, as far as physical evidence, the answer is no. When I mean sex, just to make sure we're square, I'm talking about intimacy of some type. Right, not talking about gender. Right. Were you a party to any unified command meetings where there were any conclusions drawn that, hey, this was sexually motivated? There may have been some point. I guess I'm going to refer to those as opinions and just general discussion, that there may be a connection there, but anything specific or anything that, actual evidence if you will. No, nothing came up like that. Okay, so the next question would be a logical extension. You're not aware of any forensic evidence that was recovered from the girls or from the scene that would have suggested that sex played a role in this. That's my understanding, yes. If that was the case, do you believe you would have known about it? Yes, because, I'll interject, that there was a lot of, still is to this day, interpretation or assumptions made that this was a sexually related violent crime. Okay, I'm not talking about the investigators, just in general with the, okay, do you mean, you said interpretation, you mean there's been speculation about that? Yes, but nothing that really supports that from an evidentiary standpoint. That's correct. And when you say sexually related violent crime, I mean that's kind of a phrase of art. What do you mean by that? Sexual assault or rape. All right, let's talk about Richard Allen. We talked about him a lot today, but let's kind of talk about him specifically. When did you first? Well, let me ask you this. Are you aware that Richard Allen spoke with law enforcement authorities shortly after the girls came up missing? I think that's the right way to say it. It was brought to my attention. When did you first become aware that he had reached out to law enforcement authorities? Honestly, it was right around the time period prior to his arrest last fall. Okay, so in the fall of 2022? Right. What is your understanding as to how that contact occurred and what essentially information was shared? Your general understanding? It's my understanding that the investigators had in essence re-reviewed the file on Mr. Allen and came back around and looked further at his actions of that day. And in essence, one thing led to another. Okay, is it fair to describe the information? Is it fair to say that law enforcement authorities overlooked the information that he gave to Officer Doolin for several years? I'll speak to what I consider a human standpoint, and yes, potentially a mistake was made. Can you tell me in your own words what you think that mistake was? Obviously, we should have dug further into Mr. Allen from the initial report. Just that report should have been vetted more heavily? Right. We talked to Sheriff Liggett about this yesterday. Can you just tell me how you think that happened? You said there was a mistake, and I appreciate that. Tell me, what was the mistake? Maybe is a better question? I think, again, as I felt like many of us felt in our profession, and I'll refer back to what I mentioned earlier, meeting with community members that had their own thoughts, assumptions, speculations on who they thought was at fault. And so honestly, I think there was just being overwhelmed, if you will. I mean, granted, we had a lot of law enforcement agencies here in the very beginning. But you know, as far as the coordination on the efforts being made to follow into whether it's John Smith or Susie whatever, you know, that there was just so much information being afforded to the investigators. And I'm not talking about the Unified Command investigators, but all the investigators that came on board with us. That not everything was fully vetted. And I think when they initially became involved with Mr. Allen, the general thought was, okay, this guy over here looks better, if you will. So we're going down that road versus looking at Rick. Okay, so you think that some of this was due to a lack of coordination? That was the word you just used. I guess honestly, I don't want to say lack of coordination. It's just so much information was being provided at that time period. And so it was difficult to get a good grasp on, okay, what's legitimate and what's not. I'm gonna at some point talk to Doolin. Lieutenant Doolin? Actually Captain now. He's been promoted. At some point we'll talk to him, but based on your personal knowledge of this, can you explain to me how 5 years could pass without him saying something to somebody? Hey, I talked to a guy who was there and I haven't heard anything about him. I'm assuming you had to have those conversations as law enforcement officials. I mean, I think we all did. We just sat back and thought, how'd this happen? But did you ever go to Doolin and say, how was it that you didn't mention that you talked to a guy on the bridge at the same time this all happened? I did not have that pointed conversation with him. Has there been any discussion that you've been a part of amongst the investigators in this case about why Rick Allen would have went to, let's just say, Captain Doolin, and talked to him about him being out there? I don't recall any kind of conversation like that. Do you have an opinion yourself? The only thing that comes to mind is that I don't know if he personally knew Dan or vice versa, but if anything, what comes to mind for me is like a timing situation. You know, Dan was here at one point, and you know, then Rick, happened to come along, saw Dan and said, hey. Or again, vice versa. Dan went to Rick and said, hey. So I think you mean the coincidence of them crossing paths? Right. Okay, I'm trying to understand. Yeah. In fact, it might have just been a coincidence that they happened to be in the same place at the same time. Correct. That prompted this. Yes. Communication? Yes. But there's really no other. You don't have another opinion, or do you have another opinion about why he would have went and told somebody he was at a murder scene essentially? I don't. Are you aware of any conduct by Richard Allen that demonstrated his inability, or I should say, unwillingness to cooperate with law enforcement authorities in the investigation? No, I'm not aware of anything that's been brought to my attention on that. Let's talk about the things that were recovered from his home, okay? I think I did ask this earlier, maybe in a different sense. Are you aware of any items from his home that are continued to be analyzed or tested by the lab? Specifically, no. In other words, hey, we're still looking at this jacket, or we're still looking at this knife or this glass, beer mug, or whatever the hell it is. Right. Nothing specific, no. Other than that firearm which law enforcement believes is connected to this cartridge, are you aware of any other items that have been analyzed that connect Richard Allen to this crime scene? No. Do you think that if you didn't have that tool mark evidence in this case, do you think you would have arrested Richard Allen? I'd like to think there were other things playing into this, but not as timely as what did occur. Maybe later on down the line. Okay, so there's material or there's information that you gathered later that might have led to his arrest later? Or would have been further followed into and developed so that we felt that there would be enough probable cause to present to Mr. Macleod? Can you tell me what you think that is? What you're talking about? I guess what comes to mind. Again, it's speculation on my part that there may be, that DNA may still play a role in this at some point. That can always be the case the way DNA works, right? Right. We've all been involved in these, the increase or the advancement of technology. Right. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Is that what you're talking about? Things that might develop later? Yes. Anything else other than that? No. These are a little bit more specific. We're all aware that Richard Allen has made some incriminating statements while housed at Westville, right? Yes. Have you actually listened to any of those phone calls on your own? Sheriff Liggett had shared those with me early on, but this was actually prior to the judge unsealing documents before this information was released to the public. When you say he shared with you, like you actually sat down and listened to them or, yeah, not in great length, but at least the conversation between he and his spouse, are you aware of any? Incriminating statements made by Richard Allen while he was housed at your jail right over here across the street? No. Same question with White County. No. Are you aware of any statements made by Richard Allen that contain details that are associated with the crime scene? He mentioned shoe prints. He mentioned sticks. He mentioned anything like that? No. The manner of death? Cause of death? No. So let me ask it another way, just to make sure I'm square here. Are you aware of any incriminating statements made by Richard Allen that were unique to the circumstances in this case? No. Have there been discussions that you've been a part of, you have first-hand knowledge of, about concerns about what he said, and the authenticity or the accuracy of what he's saying? Nothing. Nothing jumps out at me. Sheriff Liggett hasn't talked to you about any, like, hey, I'm really worried that, maybe he's under stress here, and these statements aren't accurate or anything like that. No. Are you aware of specific efforts that were made to monitor Richard Allen's movements, conversations, activities while he was incarcerated in any of the three facilities, Carroll County, White County, or Westville? As it relates to movement, the only thing, obviously, when the transfer was made from White County to Indiana Department of Corrections, again, I'll refer to the word timing, because I did have a couple of media inquiries back then as to when we were going to move him from White County to DOC. And so anytime he was, whether he was outside of our building or the time period going from our county to White County and then White County to DOC, again, anytime he was outside of a jail or a facility wall, there was always concern from a security standpoint. But anything else within those buildings, no, I'm not aware of. No. For context here, I happen to practice in a county where jail phone calls are monitored very closely by the prosecutor's office. Right. And I don't really purport to know exactly how that process takes place. I just get the result of it. Sure. Are you aware of a process that's in play where these calls are routinely offered up and analyzed? Reviewed? Reviewed, yeah. That happens routinely? Yes. Is that something that was and is still ongoing in this case? It was obviously I can't speak for the Indiana Department of Corrections, but I know with our facility we have that capability, and it's somewhat of a daily occurrence. Okay, why don't you just tell me, how do you do that? How does that happen mechanically? You have to have manpower and technology and all that stuff. Yeah, we have a third-party company that the sheriff actually contracts with that provides a program, if you will, software that allows us to monitor inmates' conversations. So basically every phone call that's made out of your jail is recorded, and the inmates are made aware of that. Right. And is that the case as far as you know in White County? Yes. And as far as you know in Westville? Yes. Again, I can't speak to Department of Corrections, but as far as county jails go, yes. So what is it then that prompts your team, I'm just going to use that word loosely, sure, to even make the effort to listen to those phone calls? Various factors. The one that generally comes to mind is, it'll initiate with our jail staff, and they'll get information from, say, another inmate that may be in the same cell block with someone, and say, hey, Mr. Smith, I heard him talking to his brother on the phone the other day, and offered up this. So if there's, if you will, a question mark as to what was said, then our jail staff will notify. Well, jail staff have the capability to go back and listen to these conversations as well. Or they will talk to one of our detectives or another sheriff's deputy and have them review that information. Was there a conscious effort in this case to monitor all communications between Mr. Allen and whomever while he was incarcerated at either of the two county jails? I know from our perspective, and this was mainly for his own well-being. The thought process was to monitor his calls because of not necessarily concerns, but as we would in any high-profile case, we want to keep an eye on that individual, mainly for that they're not looking to potentially harm themselves. Okay, so any information that they may convey by way of a phone conversation, we want to know that. So the answer is yes, you did make a conscious effort? Yes. And at all times you were monitoring what he was saying? Yes. And you expected, I assume, the DOC to share that information with local law enforcement or the team, the command? Yes. I mean, you wouldn't stop when he got up there, right? Right. So, but do you do that in all, let's just say, all murder cases? Every time you have a murder case, do you have somebody listen to every phone call that's made? I would suggest yes. In high-profile cases, yes. Do you do that in, a level 6 felony residential entry case when you're holding somebody without bond? Overall, I would say no. Would you say that you do that in the minority of cases for people that are charged and housed in your jail, that you consciously make an effort to monitor these communications? Not only watching out for the well-being of the individuals in our jail, but also any intelligence information we might be able to garner as it relates to narcotics. That's a good way for you guys to pick up more information? Yes. I mean, it's also a good way to get people to confess to crimes, right? Right. I hear these things, phone calls, all the time. Right, so it's helpful for that reason too? Right, so just to make sure I'm clear, this is not the norm in terms of just the raw volume of cases that you would monitor every phone call. This is kind of the exception. Right. Right. Are you doing it right now with any other cases that you're aware of? I don't want to get into the names of them. Yeah, there may be at least 2 that come to mind right now. So do you have a staff member that you assign to actually sit and listen to these phone calls? It's random as far as who it is. Mainly, again, it's our investigators would be following the leads and listening to these calls. Who's doing it in this case? Who's the point guard? Mr. Allen's case? Yeah, honestly, I don't know at this stage. I'm getting the impression it's not you. No. Do you know of anybody that was assigned that job at any point? If anything, again, I want to say Detective Liggett played some role, but I don't know if he was fully involved. Did you ever have to employ somebody specifically just to kind of consume this task because of the number of man-hours, raw time? No. What do you know about Richard Allen's mental health in terms of his history of mental health or his mental health history? I think that's a more accurate. I have no knowledge of that. Okay, you haven't been a party to any conversations about any of that. No. What do you know about his history of employment? Obviously, as we all know, he was employed by the local CVS here in Delphi. Was that really all you know about his employment history? Uh-huh. Have you ever looked at any documents or records regarding his history of employment? No. As part of your investigative process? No. Who was it that made the decision to arrest him after this test result came back? Again, I think that was, unfortunately, during that time period, my father had passed away, so I was actively involved with a family funeral during that time period. But ironically, I do recall very well that the day of my father's funeral in Clinton County, that Detective Liggett called me and said, "Hey, we're getting ready to make an arrest." Do you believe that somebody kind of stamped that? Or do you think it was a unified command decision? Again, obviously we know how the system works. I mean, the information was presented to Mr. Macleod. And then upon his review, and then ultimately the judge's decision on the probable cause affidavit. Were you a party to any of that? No. Because of your family commitment? Right. Right. Are you aware of any, I'm thinking loosely here, but are you aware of any disagreement amongst the unified command about whether or not to do this, to make this arrest? I guess, again, I'll refer back to my being human comment earlier, that throughout the whole process there were various disagreements, but that's natural, you know? So when it came to this juncture, there was discussion, you know? whether or not enough information existed from the probable cause aspect, and then you had investigators back and forth, and then, ultimately, I think, once one or two, or however many that were in favor of it had, if you will, pleaded their case to the other side, then it became a group effort in saying, yeah, let's move forward. You know, in my experience in this business, and I've kind of actually seen it from both sides, a lot of these decisions about arrests are made. They're not very difficult. I mean, a lot of times when you make arrests out in society, people, eyewitnesses told you what happened. People confess, right? Right. This was not that. I get the impression that there was a lot of debate before the ink hit the paper, so to speak. Yes. Did you ever talk to anybody at the Unified Command or any one of them, those people that were involved, that they told you they had reservations or they had real concerns? I remember then Detective Liggett and I having a conversation about. I mean, he's, in my opinion, open and objective, and so he was in his own mind displaying to me both sides of the fence, if you will. And so, but I think the information that had been developed prior to arrest, that he felt more of a conviction, that he felt this needs to move forward with this arrest. What do you remember him telling you? You said he was kind of being objective about it. I assume pros and cons. Right. Right. Is that what you're talking about? Yes. What do you remember him telling you about the pros and cons? Well, obviously, circling back around with the ammunition and the firearm aspect, and then that seemed to be the strongest point that I remember him saying. And then also, but again, referring back to not necessarily a con, but referring back to, I don't want to say beating himself up, but beating up the process as far as why this wasn't followed through properly, 5 years previously. So I think there was a small seed of doubt there as to, we didn't have it 5 years ago, now we do. So, yeah, like the information was available to you the whole time. Yeah, theoretically. But, yeah, it's taking this long? So yeah, that was an internal battle that he was going through? Yes. Okay. Anyone else confess to this crime that you're aware? Have there been any confessions that you're aware of that I wouldn't know about? Again, I don't recall specific names, but, and again, I'll offer a disclaimer here that it was later shown that there were mental health issues, and so randomly, we had maybe one or two individuals saying, hey, I did it. But again, once they were followed into, then it was determined that got a history here with a mental health aspect. I think it's fair for me to ask, do you know the names of any of these people, or can you kind of like point me in the direction? No. I'd be interested in that. No. And I feel like there's some references in the discovery in fairness to some of this stuff you're talking about. Sure. Were any of those individuals people that you know around this community? Like, oh yeah, it was my neighbor Bob? No. And actually, I'll add to what I just stated, that part information following up, not only in that individual or individual's mental health, but it was also looked into simply where were they, February 13th, 2017. Alibis? Right. So once, as I recall the one or two, and again the names escape me, but the one or two that I remember, they were followed into, I think one was determined to be in maybe Alaska or something like that. So, nowhere near here. You didn't take the opportunity to make the trip to Alaska? Although I've been there. Shame on you. I have been there. Probably an expected question. What do you believe, based on everything you know about this investigation, was the motive behind this particular crime? I don't know if this is the word as it relates to motive, but it came across to me as a controlling crime. So you're talking about controlling? You mean like power? Yes. Somebody empowering themselves over another? Yes. If that's not what you're talking about, tell me. No, that's spot on. Do you have any other opinions about that? No. Let's talk about the sketches. I'm not going to get into this in a lot of detail. There's really just two sketches I want to ask you about. The first one I'm going to call sketch number 1, and this is the gentleman with. Do you have those in your file? Do you need to use the restroom or anything? Anybody here? A recess was taken. We're back on the record. We just took a recess. We were talking about sketches, Sheriff. So there's two sketches that I have here. The first one I'm just going to call sketch number 1, the Carball sketch. You're familiar with that sketch, right? Yes. And number 2 is sketch number 1. 2 is the Betsy Blair sketch. Yes. Are you familiar with that sketch? Yeah. Give me a second here, because some of these questions were answered yesterday. I might have asked you this earlier. Did you ever speak with Sarah Carbaugh yourself? No. Did you ever review any audio or videotaped interviews of her as it relates to her description of the suspect? No. As you sit here today, do you have any knowledge at all as to how she described the person that she saw on or around the trail, just independently? The only thing as it relates to that sketch that I remember was that I believe an FBI sketch artist produced that, but that's the only thing I remember of it. Do you have any opinion as to who this particular sketch portrays in this case, or this investigation? Just someone that was seen out on the trail by her that day. Is it your opinion? Just tell me if I'm... Just answer the question. Is it your opinion that this is the bridge guy, so to speak? Yes. Same questions with number 2, Betsy Blair. Did you review any audio or video of her statements or materials with regard to her description of the person she saw on the trail? No. Okay. So you're familiar with this sketch, though? Yes. And what is your opinion as to who this sketch portrays? It's my understanding that that may have been an additional individual that was seen in the area during that time period. Somebody that's not related to or connected. I should say it's not one and the same person as sketch number 1? Yes. That's accurate? Yes, that's accurate. So is it your opinion that these sketches are reflective or are generated from witnesses that saw 2 different people? Yes. Okay. These were offered up, I'm terrible with dates, but about 2 years apart, is that correct? I believe so. What was the purpose behind offering up the second sketch? I think the overall was that no new information had developed because of the first sketch, and so I think the thought process, and this is strictly my opinion, the thought process was to offer up an additional image that people could possibly associate or be able to recall from. Who made the decision? Well, let me ask you this. Did you make the decision to move forward and offer up the second sketch? No. Again, that was a unified decision. Okay, we talked yesterday, Doug Carter. The superintendent has played a pretty significant role, at least as it relates to communicating with the public in this case. Yes. More so than you did, frankly, right? Yes. Did he play any role in deciding to issue either of these sketches or release them? Not that I'm aware of. So what was his role in this investigation, in your opinion? Doug Carter? Yeah. Mainly as the public image, and I have the utmost respect for Doug Carter, but the public image of the Indiana State Police as it relates to their involvement to this investigation. I noticed that they weren't always using their information officer to talk. Right. Which is kind of their normal process, right? Right. So they treated this case a little differently? Yes. Are you aware of any other cases where he's been involved and kind of the mouthpiece for law enforcement? Not in my career. Okay. You mentioned earlier all the different agencies that worked on this case. I'm familiar. I'm interested in the FBI's involvement. Are they involved in this investigation at this point that you're aware of? No. Why is it that they're no longer involved? At this point, mainly from the aspect of reassignments, voluntary reassignments, I believe. I'm one of the primary agents, and then due to retirements, so new field agents that are in our area have not come on board since those retirements and those reassignments by other agents. During the course of the investigation, were you communicating with, let me use this phrase loosely, a point guard from the FBI? Did they have a point of contact that you primarily communicated with? Yes. There were at least 2 agents that, I can remember one name, but I can't remember the other. Who are they? The one is Rich Davies. We heard his name yesterday. I'm drawing a blank. The other agent is, so you talked to both of them? Yes. It wasn't like you were talking to their boss or something? No. I don't know where the buck stops with all this stuff. Yeah. Okay. Were there times during the investigation, even leading up to now, when there were differences about how to handle the investigation between law enforcement agencies, when there were just disagreements? I remember some meetings that, yes, there were. Again, the human factor, in my opinion. So yeah, there were varying opinions and discussions about the approach on certain aspects. Did any of those meetings that you were involved with were there arguments? Was it hostility? I'll use that word. No, no. Was there ever any discussion amongst the unified command that you were involved with that the FBI was somehow not productive in this investigation, that they weren't helpful? I don't know if there was. Well, I mean, there were discussions that, why is the FBI doing this, or why is even Carroll County Sheriff's Office doing certain things? That was common amongst us. Not every day, but, we would have conversations. But again, we were able to, I felt like, work through things and get through it. Okay, I'll circle back to kind of a discussion we had earlier. Do you associate any of this lack of coordination early in the case with the FBI's involvement, like they came in and made things more difficult? No, I think a lot of it was just this was a big-scale situation for a small community. I get the impression there were a lot of moving parts. Yeah, and it took a while to kind of get that together. Is that? Yeah. So honestly, even with my years of experience, the overall concept was, okay, and finally once, if you will, the dust settled, then we were able to sit down and move forward. I'm going to go through each law enforcement agency. Did the FBI ever push the Unified Command to seek an arrest warrant for any other individuals in this case other than Rick Allen? There were individuals they had developed. Obviously, Mr. Logan comes to mind. That they felt that, but again, we had that collective dialogue and sat down and said, okay, no, or whatever. So any other individuals other than Ron Logan? I can't think of anyone. All right, I'm going to ask you about other suspects. But I think this is going to be, frankly, much less intensive than what Officer Liggett went through yesterday. Have you looked at the list of the 17 suspects that I offered up to Mr. McClelland? I just scanned through it. I guess my first question is, how involved were you in vetting each or any one or all of these particular individuals in this case? I was not overly involved. Again, my duties were administrative and just being briefed by our detectives. Were there names on this list that you weren't even familiar with? Or do you want me to read them to you? If you don't mind reading them to me, how about we do that? I'm going to just read you a name and you tell me if you're even familiar with the person. Ron Logan? Yes? Yes. Keegan Klein? Yes. Tony Klein? Yes. Dave Liebert? Yes. Jimmy Dale Duvall? Yes. Brad Holder? Yes. Rick Redhawk? Yes. Michael David Schmidt? No. Patrick Westfall? Yes. Thomas Lincoln Wallace? No. Brad Weber? Yes. Daniel Nation? Yes. Derek German? Yes. Elvis Fields? Yes. Garrett Kurtz? Yes. Ashley Garth? Yes. Gabe Ellis? No. So basically, of the 17, you're unfamiliar with 3 of them? Yeah, you're not familiar with 3 of them. No. So do you have any first-hand knowledge of, I'm going to ask this broadly, why these people were suspects, whether or not they were vetted, what the results of that vetting was, and whether or not they've been excluded as suspects? Is that anything that's even within your bailiwick at this point? No. I mean, that's the answer to give if you don't want to talk much more and you want to go home today. But you might have to answer this question in a more formal setting. Right? No, nothing. So you weren't assigned any one of those individuals to kind of vet or work through their potential as a suspect. I was not. Okay. Did you play any role in reviewing any of the polygraph exams that were done in this case? No. Did you, I'll say, participate or attend is probably a better word, in any of those exams? No. Do you know who the exam officers were? Don't even know that. No. I asked. I'm kind of looking through my notes here. I asked you earlier about law enforcement agencies making other arrests. And frankly, you mentioned that there was discussion about Ron Logan, right? Yes. Was that the FBI primarily? Who was it? If memory serves me correctly, I believe FBI played a larger role in that. But again, I think U.S. Marshals were also involved with it as well. Who was the contact for the Marshals? I don't remember their name. I don't know that that's really come up yet. Man? Woman? I don't remember that. Where is the U.S. Marshal around here? It's either Maryville or Indianapolis. Are you aware of any other efforts where there was information being generated by law enforcement officers and shared with the prosecutor to seek an arrest warrant for anybody else? No. Keegan Klein comes to mind. Was there ever an effort to try and seek an arrest warrant for him? Not that I was privy to. Were you involved in his circumstance much? No. All right. So earlier I was asking you about some of these hate crimes. And I think you said something about a religious group. Does the word, or I guess, yeah, does the word Odinite sound familiar? That's it. Okay, is that what you're talking about? Yes. What can you tell me about your knowledge of the potential involvement of the, I'll say, Odinites in this particular case? All I know is it was a portion of the investigation that our detectives were, and when I say our detectives, there was also, I believe, some involvement with the marshals. And just checking into the overall, what did that involve with that group? What were they involved with? You know, and whether or not there may be a connection to the case. Did you? Were they reporting back to you about this stuff? To our investigators. I say stuff. I hate to use that word. About this information? Yeah, to our investigators, not to me directly. I mean, did anybody report to you directly? Law enforcement or even non-law enforcement authorities about, hey, these Odinites are involved. Again, the only thing I remember is a conversation during unified meetings, and it being another piece of, if you will, the puzzle that they were looking into. Okay, was there any information from the crime scene that connected this particular group that drove this interest? As I believe I mentioned earlier, there was, I remember, discussion during one of our unified meetings as it relates to the placement of sticks or tree limbs at the crime scene that drew some suspicion. I saw those, which frankly reminded me of something entirely different, but that's a discussion for another day. So is it pretty apparent that those tree limbs or sticks, they weren't placed there naturally? Right, like it wasn't some environmental condition that they fell out of the tree, right? Correct, that they were done by some human for some reason? Right, there's not really much debate about that. Right, if there is a debate, tell me what it is, 'cause I'm not aware of that. No, I'm not aware of anything. Anything else at the crime scene that in some way may have driven this interest in this extremist group? My phrase, nothing comes to mind. Let's take one more break here. A recess was taken. All right, just a few more questions. We're still talking. I'm looking at my notes here. We're still talking about extremist groups, hate groups, whatever. First of all, was there some suspicion that Ron Logan was maybe involved with one of these extremist groups, or am I just not? I should ask the question straightforward. Are you aware of any information that Ron Logan was involved with some extremist group that might have been behind this crime? I do not recall any conversation like that. Are you aware, going back to this other, the Odinite stuff, are you aware of any particular suspects that were associated with that particular group? Suspects in this case, of course. No, I don't recall any names. Do you have knowledge that Unified Command was dealing with that particular situation, or that it was just some officer that was investigating the possibility of hate crimes, I guess, if you will? I recall that there was a Unified Command briefing. There was discussion. It was mainly from the aspect of, I guess I'll say, I don't want to say an update, but I mean just information sharing during a meeting, as it relates to what they were learning. And it came across to me as if they were just a broad description of what this group does, and not necessarily honing in on one particular individual or individuals related to that group. Nobody on this list that I offered up? Not that I'm aware of, no. I remember there was this blood on a tree, and it was kind of in an unusual spot. Are you generally familiar with that? That particular piece of evidence or circumstance? Vaguely, I remember a conversation. You don't remember seeing that with your own two eyes when you were out there at the scene? No. What do you remember about that conversation? What was the significance of that particular blood spot, stain, mark, was? Just in the early stages in trying to determine which one of the girls it actually belonged to. Just trying to connect the actual fluid to a person. Right. Nothing else that was unusual about it? It was across the street from the current fire department. Was either side of the bridge receiving more attention by the search party? Or was it kind of equally? When I say on either side of the bridge, I'm talking about the high bridge. You can go toward whatever. I don't know. I'm directionally challenged. Whatever direction that is. Or you can go downstream or upstream. Downstream or upstream? Downstream would be toward the city, right? Toward Delphi? Yeah. The girls were found upstream, so we're all on the same page, right? Right. The girls were upstream. As I recall again, Initial efforts were all over, so it was equally. I'm going to refer to the east side of the bridge and equally to the west side of the bridge. You know, one thing that we're wondering is, if there were so many people walking around, how was it that nobody was able to see these bodies? Has that been a thought from law enforcement as well? Yes. That's a respectful question, and I don't have an answer for it, though. Was it ever thought of or considered by anybody in Unified Command? It is unified. Yeah, Unified Command. Was it ever considered or thought or talked about by folks in Unified Command that maybe the girls weren't killed at the scene, or they weren't at the scene at the time that they were killed? I think that was, as I remember, was only brought up, and it would make sense more so discussions, I believe, with the crime scene investigators as they were collecting evidence. And so that would be a good question to ask whoever the crime investigators were. Yeah, but was there conversations within Unified Command meetings that the girls were abducted? This is at least a theory. I'm in Unified Command. There is a theory out there that the girls were abducted. Girls might have been taken to a shack or some type of building before they were killed. Has that ever been talked about by you or anyone else in Unified Command or any detective? That doesn't sound familiar. I don't think it's going to take too much longer. So, I just want to be clear on this. When you arrived at the crime scene, I know that the crime scene techs had already been there, is that right? They were just wrapping up. Had the sticks been taken off the girls at that point in time? Branches? I'm trying to remember. I can't remember. Have you seen the crime scene photographs of the sticks on the girls? It's been a while, but yes. And you did say a minute ago that it's very clear that a human being had to have placed the sticks on the girls in a certain way, right? That's my opinion. Did this whole religion, whether it's Odin religion or any other religion, did that at some point in time become a non-issue in terms of an investigation? I guess the way I'll respond to that is that, obviously at some juncture in the investigation we heard about it, had discussion, we were briefed on it, or updated, and then on down the line nothing else was ever brought up. So I don't know the outcome of that. When was the first time you heard the word Odin related to the possibility of what was going on with that crime scene? Was it within a day or two, or was it? It was, as I remember, maybe months on down the road. What about by April? Do you think you had heard the word Odin by April? I don't remember that specific type of information. Would you have been interested as the sheriff if you had encountered evidence of other people having similar interests in the type of stick configuration that was found on the girls? Would that be of interest to you as a law enforcement officer? I'd be willing to be, I guess I'll say open and objective. I'd be willing to listen. I guess what I'm saying is, if I came to you and said, hey, I've got photographs of other people that have sticks on them or in a similar situation, would you be interested in that? Again, I would listen to what they have to say. All right. Is it, to your knowledge, was there any outside source that looked into this, outside of law enforcement, that looked into this religion, this religious aspect? Was there any experts brought in, any religious experts or any types of experts that were brought in to determine whether or not what was seen at the crime scene might be religious in nature? If there were, I was not aware of it. Who was on the Unified Command? Who were the people that were in Unified Command? Specific names? As I alluded to earlier, it would be Tony Liggett, who was detective at the time, Kevin Hammond, who was one of our detectives at the time, Jerry Holman, Jay Harper, Rich Davies. That additional FBI agent that his name escapes me yet, let me think, and obviously myself as sheriff whenever they would have briefings or updates. And would it be fair to say if one of the people that you just named that's in Unified Command knew of something that was important, that all of them would know of that same important piece of information? I would assume that as long as obviously they shared that with the group. I think Brad had asked you whether there was anything found in Rick's house that connected him to the crime scene. I wanted to make sure, and the answer was no. Is the same answer no if the question were, was there anything connecting Rick to the crime scene that was found in his car? 'Cause I know the cars. 'Cause I think his cars were also collected. Not that I remember. No. When Brad asked the question along the lines of, Was there anybody in Unified Command that was questioning whether there was enough evidence to arrest Rick Allen? You had indicated that there was some discussion about that, but I didn't hear. Who were the people that were? You said there was actually two groups. There was a group that had to make their pitch, and then there was another group that said, here's why we think that he ought to be arrested. And I wanted to know who were in those two groups. Well, if I may amend that response from the aspect that, again, it was open dialogue, and I think everyone who was part of Unified Command. You know, we went through the pros list, and then the cons list. And then, at the end of the day, then everyone would say, okay, yeah, we see it, and let's move forward. Was there any, like in my firm, we have these kinds of discussions? Sure. And at some point in time, I might just say, well, I abstain, or I'm not going in with this, but good for you. Was there anybody like that? I mean, again, back to when discussions would take place. I mean, yeah, you'd have the guy in the back of the room go, wait a minute, you know, and say, I don't see it. And then the conversation would continue, and then eventually everybody kind of like having everybody on the jury on board. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like a jury. Sounds like how a jury might operate. Right. Okay. And I did want to clear one thing up. You said that there was a couple of people that you remember that had confessed to the crime, but then you looked into it, and they had mental health issues, or they were in Alaska in one situation, perhaps. Were these people that confessed to the police, or were these people that confessed to other people, then the other people came to you? That's a good way of putting that. And I do recall at least one individual, and it may have been an ex-wife that came forward and said, hey, my ex-husband, blah, 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 but he's nuts. So there was at least one instance that I remember, yeah, where the individual, the ex-wife, came forward. It's kind of like what we hear. It's the vernacular for us older people, is they confess to the Lindbergh kidnapping, the Lindbergh baby, right? Right. Yeah. But so I was wondering if that's where my question came in. Was it people that were like walking and knocking on the police door, ringing in, I killed it? Or was it people that were calling in and saying, my ex-husband killed them? Was it a combination of both of those things? Yes. Okay. Are there reports written on who these people might be? I'm presuming. I assume. Yeah. Again, in the very get-go, things were documented as far as where that information is specifically this date, I don't know. All right. Thank you. One of the things you said was there was just like would be. In my opinion, what would be expected is there's going to be some questioning of, is the FBI, what are they doing? And then you even said people were also asking, why would Carroll County do this? And some people were saying, why would the FBI do this? Who was asking? I was confused as to who would be asking, why would Carroll County do this? Would that be, are you talking about common citizens? Or are you talking about other agencies? Mainly, I know as sheriff there were a number of times, particularly media that would. Media would say, who's the lead investigating agency for this case? So again, it was mainly the media. Who was the lead investigating? You said it earlier. It was Carroll County, I think. I as sheriff, and maybe it's a personal thing, but I felt that we were the lead agency. I think that's it. I have one more question. I'm going to use all the time. Actually, this didn't come up yesterday either. I asked you earlier about early on today. I asked you about the voice data and the analyzation of that. And basically, I think what you said generally was that you weren't aware of really any information that was analyzed that was helpful. I did not play a role in that. Okay, that's fair. Whatever you said, you said. The one thing I didn't ask you, so we've talked about. We referenced this phrase, down the hill, and this command, I guess, that was made, it was kind of a little bit out of context. But the question I have is, are you aware of any analysis or conclusions that were drawn that voice was generated by the other person in the video or the person in the video? No, I'm not aware of any analysis like that was done. Okay, and forgive me, because I'm sure you've watched that video more times than I have. I can assure you of that. But I've watched it. Did you yourself? Were you able to see the person in the video actually talking as you're hearing those words? I guess I'll ask, what are you referring to? The bridge guy. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't just say that honestly. To see the actual movement from his lips moving, if you will, no. So you can't discern that from the video. Is that generally accurate? Right. Like you're not seeing something that I'm not seeing is what I'm trying to get at. Right. Okay. So was there ever any analysis conducted or investigation into whether or not those words were coming from that man's mouth? I'm not aware of anything. Was there ever any discussion that you were involved with that those words may have come from somebody else? No. Behind the video, or you know what I mean, that was not in the line of sight of the video. No. You never had those discussions? No. And you never heard any other investigators have those discussions? No. Okay, I don't have anything else. Nick, really? 12 minutes left.